My house was destroyed by a devastating fire when I was 65. I went to seek refuge at my son's house, but he turned me away, saying his girlfriend needed privacy. Desperate, I called my childhood sweetheart, a man I hadn't seen in 4 decades. When he opened the door to his mansion, he said 3 words, "You're finally back." My life changed forever. But before continuing, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and leave a comment in the comments. Where are you watching this video from? We love to hear how far our stories go. My name is Gabriela, and at 65 I thought I'd already experienced every kind of suffering life could offer. I was wrong. It all started on a Wednesday that seemed like any other in Puebla, Mexico. I was in the kitchen preparing my afternoon coffee when I smelled something strange. I decided to check, thinking I might have left something on the stove. When I opened the living room door, I was greeted by a wall of smoke so thick I could barely see through it. The flames were already consuming the curtains and climbing the walls with a speed that paralyzed me for a few crucial seconds. The smoke detector should have gone off, but I discovered later that the battery had died months before. A simple oversight that would cost me everything I had. I ran back to the kitchen, trying to reach the phone to call the fire department, but the smoke was already everywhere, making it difficult to breathe and impossible to think clearly. I heard glass breaking and realized I didn't have time. The flames were consuming my house with a voracious hunger that seemed impossible to contain. My only thought was to get out of there alive. I grabbed my bag from the kitchen table and ran to the back door. The last thing I saw before leaving was the portrait of Ricardo, my late husband, beginning to blacken from the heat. The neighbors were already on the street when I came out coughing and staggering. Mrs. Fuentes, my 78-year-old neighbor, was the first to approach, hugging me as we both watched helpless as the flames devoured the house where she had lived for more than 40 years. The firefighters arrived within 10 minutes, but it was too late. They managed to prevent the fire from spreading to the neighboring houses, but mine was beyond saving. In just 1 hour, 4 decades of memories were reduced to ashes. The kitchen table where Diego used to do his homework, the walls that bore my son's growth, marks the room I shared with Ricardo for 37 years. Everything was gone. I stood on the sidewalk, wrapped in a blanket someone had draped over my shoulders while the firefighters did their work. Later, I would be told it was probably a short circuit in an old outlet in the living room, a simple electrical problem that turned my life into ruins. The flames eventually subsided, leaving only a blackened smoking structure. The fire chief approached, his face smeared with soot, his eyes filled with a compassion I couldn't bear at the moment. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. We did what we could, but..." There was no need for me to finish the sentence. I could see it for myself. Total loss. Everything I owned, apart from the clothes I was wearing and the contents of my purse, was gone. The neighbors, who were lucky enough to still have homes, took me in the first night. Sweet Mrs. Fuentes insisted I stay with her, but her small apartment was already crowded with her grandchildren visiting. The Red Cross had set up emergency shelters, but the thought of sleeping in a gymnasium full of strangers made me feel even more lost. That's when I knew I had to call Diego. My son lives about 40 minutes away in Cholula, in an elegant neighborhood with tree-lined streets and houses that look like they're straight out of a magazine. He moved there 4 years ago when he was promoted to regional manager at the insurance company where he works. We weren't close, not in the way mothers and sons should be, but he was all the family I had left. I used Mrs. Fuentes' phone because mine had melted along with everything else. "Diego, darling, it's Mom," I said in a softer voice than I intended. "Mom, what happened? You sound upset. There was a fire, son. The house, it's gone. Everything's gone." There was a pause that seemed like an eternity. "Did you hurt yourself?" "No, I'm fine, just a few scratches and a sore throat from the smoke. But I need a place to stay while I figure things out, just temporarily." Another pause. Of course, Mom, come on. We'll figure it out. The relief that washed over me was so intense, I almost collapsed. My son would take care of me. Despite all our distance, all the missed calls, and awkward holiday dinners, he was still my boy. I spent the next morning staring at the charred ruins, waiting for the insurance adjuster to arrive. Promptly, at 9 a.m., a young man who seemed like he'd rather be anywhere else showed up, scouring what remained of my house with a clipboard and a camera. "Total loss," he said matter-of-factly, as if those 2 words didn't represent my entire life. "How much?" I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. "Well, you had a UNODS policy. 2 million pesos up front, but with your deductible and depreciation, we're talking maybe 900,000 pesos, maybe less. 900,000 pesos to rebuild 42 years of life. It seemed impossible. Mrs. Fuentes helped me buy some basic clothing and hygiene items with the emergency money the Red Cross had given me. Everything I had now fit into a small, borrowed suitcase. That was it. It was all I had left of the life I'd built. The trip to Diego's house felt like a trip to a foreign country. Everything seemed different when you had nowhere to go back to. The familiar places, the gas station where I always bought my lottery tickets, the restaurant where Ricardo and I used to have breakfast on Sundays. They all seemed to belong to someone else's life now. Diego's neighborhood was spotless as always. Perfect lawns, perfect sidewalks, perfect lives that continued exactly as they had been the day before. I felt like an intruder, bringing my tragedy into his immaculate world. Their house was a 2-story colonial with white shutters and a red door that Valentina, his girlfriend, had chosen. He had met her exactly 3 times in the 2 years they had been together. She was 30 and he was 39. I worked at a marketing firm downtown and had opinions on everything from the color of the walls to the type of wine to serve at dinner. I parked the taxi in her driveway and stood still for a moment, gathering my courage. This is temporary, I told myself, just until I can figure out what comes next. Just until the insurance money comes in and I can find a small apartment somewhere. I never imagined that walking up to my son's front door with my small borrowed suitcase would be one of the hardest things I've ever done. But when I raised my hand to knock, I felt a familiar sensation, the same empty feeling I'd had when Ricardo died, as if the ground were disappearing beneath my feet. I just didn't know yet how much deeper I was about to fall. Diego opened the door before I could knock, as if he'd been watching me through the window. For a single moment, seeing his familiar face, Ricardo's eyes, my stubborn chin made me feel like everything could be okay. He was my son, my only son. Certainly blood meant something. "Mom," he said, stepping aside to let me in, but his voice held something I couldn't place. Distance maybe, or discomfort. Valentina appeared behind him almost immediately, as if she'd been waiting in the wings. She was wearing white jeans and a silk blouse that probably cost more than she usually spent on a month's groceries. Her brown hair was pulled back in one of those messy buns that somehow looked perfectly put together, and her smile was the kind that never reached her eyes. "Gabriela, how awful about your house," she said, but he was looking at my tattered suitcase, not at me. Diego told me what happened. I placed my suitcase in his immaculate entryway, suddenly aware of how it must look. My newly purchased clothes, cheap and simple, looked out of place against the polished marble of the hallway. I could still smell the smoke in my hair despite the shower I'd taken at Mrs. Fuentes' house. "It's only temporary," I said quickly, "just until I can recover." Diego and Valentina exchanged a look, one of those wordless conversations couples have that excludes everyone else in the room. I'd seen Ricardo and me do the same thing countless times, but from the other side, it felt like I was being excluded from a club I didn't know existed. "Let's sit down and talk," Diego said, leading me into the living room. Their house was beautiful in the way magazine houses are beautiful. Everything matched. Nothing was out of place. White furniture that looked like no one had ever actually sat on it. Glass coffee tables that reflected the light from windows so clean they seemed invisible. It was the kind of house where you were afraid to touch anything. I sat on the edge of the immaculate sofa, my new shoes firmly planted on the spotless hardwood floors. Valentina noticed and flinched slightly. "So what's the plan?" Diego asked, settling into the chair across from me. Not next to me on the couch, where he could have put his arm around his grieving mother, but in front of me, as if we were conducting business. "Well, the insurance adjuster said it'll take a few weeks to process everything. Maybe a month." I was hoping I could stay here until then, just until I found a small apartment or something. The silence that followed lasted about 10 seconds longer than it should have. I saw Valentina's face change. I saw his chin tense almost imperceptibly. He leaned over and placed his hand on Diego's arm, a gesture that seemed supportive but was clearly possessive. "Mom?" Diego began, and I knew from his tone that what came next would break my heart. "The problem is, Valentina and I have been talking, and we really value our privacy here. We work long hours, and this is our sanctuary, if you understand?" I blinked, not quite understanding. I wouldn't get in her way. I'd stay away. I'd help with cooking, cleaning. I wouldn't be a nuisance. Valentina leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. "It's not about being a nuisance, Gabriella. It's about space. This house is our first home together, and we're still finding our rhythm as a couple. I'm her mother." I said the words coming out sharper than I intended. "Of course you are," Valentina replied softly. "And that's why we think you'd be more comfortable somewhere else. Somewhere where you can have your independence while you rebuild." I looked at Diego, hoping he'd contradict her. To remember that I was the woman who had stayed up with him through every fever, who had worked double shifts to pay for his college books, who had held his hand through his divorce 3 years earlier when his ex-wife left him for his personal trainer. Instead, he nodded. "Valentina's right, Mom. We thought you'd be happier with your own space." The words hit me like a physical punch. I actually felt my chest tighten, as if someone were squeezing my lungs. Happier. Diego, I lost everything yesterday. Everything. And do you think I'd be happier alone in a hotel room than here with my family? "It doesn't have to be a hotel," Valentina said quickly. "There are some lovely extended stay places near the mall. Very clean, very safe, and they have small kitchens, so you can cook for yourself." I looked at this woman who had been in my son's life for only 2 years, telling me where I should live after losing my house. And how am I supposed to pay for this lovely extended stay place? The insurance money won't come in for weeks. Diego shifted uncomfortably. "I could help with that. A few $100 to get you started. A few $100. As if I were a distant relative, he barely knew not the woman who gave him life. "Diego?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I changed your diapers, rocked you through your colic, taught you to ride a bike, and helped you with your homework. I hugged you when you cried, because Lucia Velasco broke your heart in high school." Her face twisted slightly, but Valentina held her arm tighter. "No one is questioning your story," she said. "We just thought we'd all be more comfortable with some boundaries." Boundaries, I'd heard that word from the therapist Diego had seen after his divorce. It was all about boundaries. "They're kicking me out," I said categorically. "We're not kicking you out," Diego protested. "We're just saying that maybe this arrangement wouldn't work for anyone." "Whose idea was it?" I asked, although I already knew the answer. I could see it in the way Valentina leaned back slightly satisfied, as if she'd won something. "We discussed it together," Diego said, but he wouldn't look me in the eye. I stood up slowly, my knees creaking in a way that reminded me I was 65 and alone in the world. "I understand. Mom, don't be like that. We're trying to do what's best for everyone." "What's best for everyone?" I repeated the words, as if they were in a foreign language. What would be best for everyone, Diego, is if your mother didn't have to sleep on the streets tonight. Valentina's perfectly made-up face twisted into a look of concern. You don't have to sleep on the streets. Like I said, there are options. I looked around the immaculate living room once more. At the family photos that included Diego and Valentina, but none of me. At the expensive furniture that no one was actually allowed to live in. To my son, who had chosen this cold, beautiful woman over his own mother. You're right, I finally said. There are always options. I picked up my small suitcase. Its weight felt heavier now that I knew where it wasn't welcome. Diego stood up, looking uncomfortable, but not uncomfortable enough to change his mind. I'll call you in a few days, he said, as soon as you're settled somewhere. Don't bother, I said, surprised by how firm my voice sounded. I wouldn't want to invade your sanctuary. Valentina had the decency to look slightly embarrassed, but not enough to speak. Not enough to say, wait, this is wrong, she's your mother. I left that perfect house with its perfect partner and perfect boundaries, and stood on the sidewalk for a long time before I could force myself to walk. Through the front window, I could see Diego and Valentina talking probably about how difficult I was being, how much drama I was bringing into their peaceful lives. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent years after Ricardo died telling myself I was strong, independent, and that I didn't need anyone. Now when I truly needed help, I discovered that independence is a luxury you can only afford when you have options. I walked to a small hotel on the corner and spent almost all my remaining money on a room for the night. Sitting on the hard bed, staring at the peeling walls, I tried to figure out where a 65-year-old woman with almost no money and only a suitcase of cheap clothes was supposed to go. It was then that I remembered the business card I'd carried in my wallet for almost 40 years, miraculously saved, because it had been with me at the time of the fire. Yellowed with age and soft from being handled so much. A card I never thought I'd actually use from a man I loved when the world was young and everything seemed possible. Raúl Delgado, the man who promised to come back for me one day before life got in the way, and the day never came. I spent 3 nights in that cheap hotel before finding the courage to make the call. 3 nights waking up with back pain from the thin mattress and the taste of shame in my mouth. 3 nights listening to fights in the hallway and the constant noise of traffic through the poorly insulated window. 3 nights washing my few new clothes in the tiny bathroom and hanging them to dry on the only chair in the room. The business card felt like tissue paper between my fingers, worn by 4 decades of being carried but never used. Raúl Delgado was written on it in faded blue ink, beneath it a phone number with an area code I didn't recognize. On the back in my own young handwriting, "Never forget G." I had written those words when I was 25, believing with the absolute certainty of youth that Raúl Delgado would be the great love of my life. He was 26, with dark hair falling over his forehead and eyes the color of golden amber. He worked at his father's construction company after college and dreamed of bigger things, of building something that mattered. We dated for 9 months, which at 25 felt like an eternity. He used to take me to the overlook in the hills outside the city where we'd sit on the hood of his car and talk about our plans. I'm going to start my own business. He'd tell me something in construction or real estate development, something that would make me rich enough to give you everything you deserve. I'll come back for you, Gabriela, he promised me the night before he left for a project in the capital. I'll make something of myself, and then I'll come back and marry you. But promises at 25 have a habit of fading when real life takes over. He wrote letters at first, long, passionate letters, full of dreams and plans. I responded, telling him about my job at the bank, how I was looking forward to it, how I had promised. Then the letters became shorter, less frequent. When I met Ricardo 6 months later at a church event, Raul felt like a beautiful dream I'd once had too good to be true. Ricardo was stable, reliable, already 32 years old, and had a good job at the telephone company. He didn't promise me the world, but he did promise me a home, a family security. When he proposed to me after 5 months of dating, I said yes. I put Raul's business card in the pocket of my wedding dress, a secret talisman I couldn't bring myself to throw away. Now, 40 years later, sitting in a cheap hotel room that smelled of damp and old cigarettes, I wondered what had become of that dreamy man with the amber eyes. I followed him sporadically over the years the way you do with first loves. Through mutual friends, I heard he'd kept his promises, that he'd started a construction company that had grown into something big. He never married, which surprised people. Too busy building his empire, they said. That Delgado was always ambitious. The last time I heard from him, maybe 8 years ago, his company had expanded beyond Puebla to Mexico City and Monterrey. Thin development building shopping malls and office complexes. The young man from the construction company had become the kind of man who wore expensive suits and made decisions that affected hundreds of people. What would that man want with a 65-year-old widow staying in a cheap hotel with nothing but a suitcase of clothes from the supermarket? The rational part of my brain said it was ridiculous, pathetic even. You don't call someone after 40 years because your life has fallen apart. You don't look for your childhood sweetheart when you're old, desperate, and have nowhere else to go. But rational thought is a luxury when you're counting the coins in your purse and trying to figure out if you have enough for one more night at the hotel. By the 4th morning, I couldn't stand it anymore. My back ached from the hard mattress. My money was running out, and the hotel had already warned me they would need the room for a reservation that would arrive the next day. I sat at the small table in the room staring at the card, my hands shaking beyond belief from the morning chill. What would I say? Hi Raul, remember me. I'm homeless now. Can you help? The card number was probably disconnected, or it would sound like some secretary politely informing me that Mr. Delgado was too important to accept calls from random women claiming to have known him since his youth. But what if he wasn't? What if he answered? My heart pounded as I dialed the number. Each digit felt like a step off a cliff. It rang once, twice. Thin development. Raul speaking. His voice was deeper now, shaped by time and responsibility, but unmistakably his. After 40 years, I would have recognized it anywhere. I almost hung up, almost hit the end button, and went off to find some other solution. But something in his tone, some warmth that seemed to flow through the phone and envelop me like a blanket, made me speak. Raul, I'm Gabriela Mendoza. Well, I'm Gabriela Sanchez now, but I used to be Mendoza. Silence long enough for me to think maybe the call had dropped, or maybe he'd hung up, or maybe he had no idea who I was. Then Gabriela, just my name spoken like a prayer or a wonder, as if I couldn't believe it. I'm so sorry for calling like that. I rushed the words tumbling in my desperation to explain before he could hang up. I know it's been a long time, and I probably shouldn't be calling, but I didn't know who else to call. Where are you? He interrupted, his voice thin with concern. I'm in Cholula at a hotel called El Descanso, and I know this sounds crazy, but my house burned down last week. I lost everything, and my son doesn't want me to stay with him, and I have nowhere else to go. The words came out in a torrent, each one harder to say than the last. Admitting that your own son rejected you was like admitting you'd failed in the most fundamental part of being human. Give me the exact address. Raul said, his voice now completely professional. I'm going to pick you up. You don't have to do that. I don't know why I called. I guess I just needed to hear a friendly voice. Gabriela. His tone brooked no argument. Tell me where you are. I'm already walking to my car. Over the phone, I could hear the sound of a door closing and engine starting. It was really coming. This man I hadn't spoken to in 40 years was abandoning whatever important business he was doing to rescue me from a cheap hotel. I gave him the address, my voice barely a whisper. Raul! I'm not the girl you remember. Me neither, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. But I've been waiting for 40 years for this call. After we hung up, I spent the next hour packing my few belongings, alternating between panic and disbelief. What was I doing? What were we doing? This was crazy. You couldn't just rekindle relationships after 4 decades as if you were continuing a conversation from yesterday. But as I stared out the hotel window waiting for a car, I wouldn't recognize carrying a man who might not recognize me. I felt something I hadn't felt since before the fire. Hope. Maybe it was a foolish hope. Maybe it would lead to more disappointment, more heartbreak. But it was hope nonetheless. And at 65 with nothing left to lose, hope was worth the risk. At 10:45, sharp a silver Mercedes pulled up in front of the hotel, shiny and gleaming against the worn backdrop of the street. I watched out the window as the car parked, my heart pounding against my ribs, like a bird trying to escape its cage. The windows were tinted so I couldn't see inside, but something deep in my chest told me it was him. The engine cut off, and the driver's door opened. Even after 40 years, even with gray hair and lines around his eyes, even carrying the weight of decades I hadn't shared with him, I recognized him immediately. Raul Delgado stepped out of that car as if he were stepping out of my dreams. And when he looked up at the window where I was, the years crumbled between us as if they had never existed. I grabbed my suitcase and went down the stairs with the haste of someone who fears a dream will vanish if they wait too long. He was standing by the car waiting for me. Raul had the same relaxed confidence he had at 26. But now, it was refined, polished by success and maturity. He wore dark jeans and a navy sweater that probably cost more than he usually spent on a month's groceries. But her eyes, those amber eyes that had haunted my dreams for decades, were exactly the same. I wanted to hide. I wanted to go back to the room and pretend this wasn't happening. I looked terrible. My hair hadn't been cut in months, my cheap clothes were wrinkled, and I felt small and insignificant compared to the elegant man waiting for me. But he was already smiling at me, a smile that made my heart leap like I was 25 again. I approached him slowly, suddenly unable to breathe. "Hi, Gabriella," he said softly. Up close, I could see the changes time had wrought. His dark hair was now silver-cut short and professional. Lines marked the corners of his eyes and shaped his mouth. He was broader-shouldered, more solid, as if success had given him physical weight along with everything else. But when he smiled at me, I saw the young man who used to take me to the lookout and tell me about his dreams. "Hello," I managed to say. My voice was barely a whisper. He studied my face for a long moment, those amber eyes taking in every detail. I wanted to apologize for how I looked, for how far I'd fallen for calling him, after all those years with nothing to offer but trouble. Instead, he said 3 words that changed everything. "You look beautiful." I started to cry. Right there on the sidewalk in front of that cheap hotel with Raul Delgado standing next to me, I completely broke down. 40 years of repressed tears, 4 days of uncertainty and despair, a lifetime of being told I wasn't enough. It all came out in ugly, gasping sobs I couldn't control. He didn't say anything else. He didn't try to shut me up or tell me everything would be okay. He just took my suitcase in one hand and wrapped his other arm around me as I collapsed against his chest. He smelled of expensive cologne and clean clothes, of success and stability, of everything I'd lost and everything I'd never had. His sweater was soft against my cheek, and his arms were strong around my trembling shoulders. "I'm sorry," I gasped against his chest. "I'm sorry, Raul. I shouldn't have called. I shouldn't have dragged you into this mess. Shh, he murmured, his hand stroking my back. You should have called years ago. When the tears finally stopped, I pulled away to look at him, embarrassed by the wet stain I'd left on his expensive sweater. I must look like a mess. He reached out and wiped a tear from my cheek, his touch soft as a whisper. You look like someone who's been through hell and survived. That's not a disaster, Gabriella. That's strength. I laughed, but it came out shaky and bitter. Strength. I'm 65 years old, staying in a fourth-rate hotel because my own son doesn't like me. That's not strength. That's pathetic. His chin tightened, and for a moment I saw a flash of the anger he was trying to hide. Your son is a fool. You don't know him. I don't need to know him. I know you. He paused, his hands still resting gently on my shoulders. Or at least I knew you, and the Gabriela Mendoza I knew would never turn away someone in need, especially family. The way she said my maiden name, as if it were something precious she'd saved all these years, made my chest ache with longing for the woman I used to be. That was a long time ago, I said. I'm not that girl anymore. Maybe not, she agreed. But I'd like to meet the woman she's become. He put my suitcase in the trunk of his luxury car, as if it were a treasure, not a cheap bag containing everything I had left in the world. As he opened the passenger door for me, I was momentarily paralyzed by the unreality of the situation. The morning of the fire, I had a home, memories, a life built over decades. Now I was getting into the car of a man I hadn't seen in 40 years, with no idea what was coming next. Where are we going? I asked as he started the engine. Home, he said simply. The drive lasted almost an hour, passing through increasingly affluent neighborhoods, until we reached an area I'd never seen before. Rolling hills dotted with properties hidden behind stone walls and iron gates. Trees that looked like they'd been professionally planted. Mailboxes that probably cost more than most people's cars. Raul turned into a long driveway marked only by a small brass plaque that read Delgado. The driveway curved through mature trees and manicured gardens before opening into a circular driveway in front of a house that took my breath away. It wasn't ostentatious or flashy. It was elegant in the way real money is elegant. Discreet, secure, built to last. Stone and wood with tall windows that captured the afternoon light and a porch that invited you to sit and linger. Raul, I whispered, looking at this monument to everything he had accomplished. This is it. This is incredible. He parked the car but didn't get out immediately. Instead, he sat there staring at the house as if he were seeing it through my eyes. It's too big, he said calmly. It always has been. I built it thinking I'd fill it one day, but he shrugged. A gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. Some dreams don't work out as planned. You were never married. The question slipped out before I could stop it. She turned to look at me, her expression unreadable. I came close a couple of times, but there was always something missing. He hesitated for a moment, then said simply, You. The word hung between us in the silent car, heavy with 40 years of what-ifs and what could have been. I wanted to ask what he meant. I wanted to understand how I could have been absent from a life I was never a part of. But before I could find the words, he was already getting out of the car, coming around to open my door. The house was even more impressive inside. Wood floors that shone like honey-high ceilings, furniture that looked like it belonged in architectural magazines, but it didn't feel cold or museum-like. There were books everywhere, comfortable reading chairs placed near the windows, and photos scattered on side tables. It felt like a home where someone actually lived, not just a showcase for success. Are you hungry? Raoul asked, leading me into a kitchen that was bigger than my entire old living room. I was just about to make lunch when you knocked. I realized I was starving. The hotel breakfast had been nothing but stale bread and weak coffee, and my stomach was cramping from the emptiness and nerves. I don't want to cause any trouble, I began, but he interrupted me with a look. Gabriella, stop. You're not a nuisance. You're... He paused, searching for words. You're the answer to a question I've been asking for 40 years. While he cooked, and he really knew how to cook moving around that enormous kitchen, with the ease of someone who had learned to take care of themselves, I studied the photographs scattered around the room. Raoul, at opening ceremonies, cutting ribbons, shaking hands with important people. Raoul, with various women at charity galas and business dinners, always smiling, but never looking completely happy. Tell me about your life, he said, placing a plate of perfectly grilled chicken and roasted vegetables in front of me. Tell me about Ricardo, your son, everything I missed. So I did. Over a lunch that tasted like heaven after days of horrible hotel food, I told him about my marriage to Ricardo. Ricardo, stable and comfortable, who gave me security and companionship, if not passion. About Diego, the baby I had wanted so desperately and loved so fiercely, who grew up to be a stranger who valued his girlfriend's comfort over his mother's needs. I told him about the years of being a good wife, a good mother, a good widow, about the fire that had taken everything I owned, and the son who had taken everything I had left. Raoul listened without interrupting, his amber eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. I'm sorry, he finally said. I'm sorry for Ricardo, for your house, for your son, but I'm not sorry you called me. Why? The question came out smaller than intended. He reached across the table and took my hand in his. Still strong, still gentle, still able to make my heart race after all these years. Because I never stopped loving you, he said calmly. Because every business I did, every success I achieved, every peso I earned, was all so I could be worthy of you when you came back to me. Raoul, I know this sounds crazy. I know 40 years is a long time, and we're different people now. But when I heard your voice on that phone today, it was like the missing piece in my life finally fell into place. I looked at our joined hands, his tanned and well cared for mine, worn from work, showing every day of my 65 years. I'm not the girl you remember. No, he agreed. You're better. You're real. You've lived and loved and lost and survived. That 25-year-old girl was pretty, but she was only potential. You are the woman that potential became. The words settled around my heart like a warm blanket healing wounds I didn't even know I still carried. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt seen not as someone's mother or someone's wife or someone's burden, but as myself. What happens now? I asked. Raoul smiled, that same devastating smile that made me fall in love with him when the world was young. Now we're discovering what the rest of our lives look like. Together, if you love me. As I sat in his beautiful kitchen filled with good food and possibility, I realized that sometimes the fire that destroys your old life is just making room for the life you were always meant to have had. Living with Raoul was like discovering a version of myself I'd forgotten existed. The first week was awkward, tiptoeing around each other like polite strangers sharing space. He gave me the entire guest suite of his house, a room larger than my old living room, a private bathroom with a bathtub that would fit 2 people, and a small sitting area overlooking his gardens. I felt like I was staying in a luxury hotel, afraid to touch anything or leave too much evidence of my presence. But Raoul was patient the way successful men learn to be, and gradually I began to relax. He had a housekeeper, Carmen, who came 3 days a week. But the other days, I found myself cooking for him. It started small, making coffee in the morning, preparing simple lunches. But Raúl appreciated everything with the enthusiasm of someone who had eaten buffet meals and restaurant food for decades. "This is amazing," he said one evening, savoring the stew he'd made using my grandmother's recipe. "I haven't eaten a home-cooked meal like this in years." "It's not elegant at all," I protested. But inside, I was glowing. When was the last time someone appreciated my cooking? Diego used to complain that I made the same 5 dishes over and over again. Valentina once suggested he try more contemporary flavors for family dinners. Raúl shook his head. "It's perfect." "You are perfect." That word, perfect, should have made me feel uncomfortable. She was 65 years old with gray roots peeking through and laugh lines that had become permanent furrows. My hands were blemished with age, my body soft in places that used to be firm. I was anything but perfect. But when Raúl looked at me, he saw me reflected in his eyes as someone beautiful, someone worthy of love, attention, and gentle care. We fell into routines that felt as natural as breathing. We ate breakfast together on the back porch, where Raúl read business reports, and I watched the birds at their elaborate feeders. We walked around the property in the afternoon, where he showed me the gardens he had planted himself, and the greenhouse where he grew orchids as a hobby. Nights were for conversation. We had 40 years to recover, and we did so slowly, carefully, like archaeologists examining precious artifacts. I told him how difficult it had been to lose Ricardo, about the emptiness of the house in the months that followed, about how I had to force myself to get out of bed every morning, about the loneliness of widowhood, the way people treat you like half a person once your husband is gone. He told me about his business, how it had grown from a small construction company to a development empire with projects in 3 states, and about the women he dated over the years. Smart, accomplished women who looked perfect next to him at charity galas, but who never made him feel complete. There was one woman, he said one night as we sat by his fireplace, the rain beating against the windows. Elena was an architect, brilliant, beautiful. Everyone said we were perfect for each other. I felt a pang of jealousy that surprised me with its intensity. "What happened? Did I propose to her?" he said calmly. "On Christmas Eve, 5 years ago, a grand display, a restaurant with a city view, an expensive ring, everything she'd said she wanted. And she said yes. We planned the wedding for the following summer. But as the date approached, I kept having this feeling that something was off. Not with her. She was everything anyone could want in a wife, but with me." He paused, staring into the fire. "The night before the wedding, I called it off." "Raúl." "No, what did you say?" "The truth." He looked at me then, his amber eyes, that I was still in love with a woman I'd known 40 years ago, and it wouldn't be right to marry her while my heart belonged to someone else. The words hit me like a physical blow. "Did you cancel your wedding for me? For the memory of me? For the possibility that someday, somehow I might need you, and you'd be here waiting?" I looked at him, at this successful, handsome man who could have had anyone. And I tried to process what he was telling me. "This is crazy," I said. "Is it?" He leaned forward, taking my hands in his. "Is it crazier that you keep my business card in your wallet for 40 years? He was right. Of course, we were both crazy. We both lived with the ghosts of what could have been. But somehow, against all odds, our particular brand of madness had brought us back together. 3 weeks after my arrival, Diego called. I was in Raúl's kitchen, making dinner and humming to myself. I was really humming. Something I hadn't done in years. When my phone rang. Diego's name on the screen made my stomach clench with the familiar anxiety. "Hello, dear," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Mom?" Her tone was strange, carefully controlled. "I've been trying to call you. Your phone keeps going straight to voicemail." That was true. I'd been screening my calls, not ready to deal with any guilt or obligations Diego might impose on me. "I've been busy doing what I heard you left the hotel weeks ago." "Where are you living?" I looked around Raúl's beautiful kitchen, at the fresh flowers he'd brought home that morning, at the expensive wine glasses on the counter. "I'm staying with a friend." "What friend, Mom? You don't have friends with money?" Her assumption offended me partly because it had been true for so long after Ricardo's death. I'd let most of my friendships fade away too tired and too proud to maintain relationships when I had nothing to offer in return. "Would you be surprised?" I said coldly. There was a pause, and I could practically hear him processing that information. "Mom, I think we need to talk. Valentina and I have been discussing the situation, and we think maybe we were a bit hasty. Perhaps you could stay in our guest room for a while. Just until you recover." The offer that would have meant everything to me a month ago now felt empty, insulting even. "What made you change your mind?" Another pause. We realized that maybe we were too focused on our own needs. The family should unite. What he meant, I realized, was that he'd probably heard through the neighborhood gossip network that his mother was no longer staying at a cheap hotel. Someone had mentioned seeing her with a well-dressed man in an expensive car. Something was curious, and curiosity had made him generous. "That's very kind of you," I said, "but I'm perfectly happy where I am." "Mom, you can't just move in with a stranger. It's not safe." "What do you know about this person I know? He's never made me feel like a burden," I said quietly. "I know he values my company and appreciates my cooking and tells me I'm beautiful every day." The wedding wasn't like my first. When I married Ricardo 40 years ago, it was all about what everyone else expected. A white dress, a church ceremony, a reception at the community center with a DJ, and a bar with drinks. We invited everyone we knew and a few people we didn't particularly like because that's what it was like. We performed the ritual for the community, not for ourselves. This time, Raúl and I did exactly what we wanted. The ceremony took place in his backyard on a crisp November morning, 5 months after that phone call at the hotel. The pastor was an old friend of Raúl's, and the only witnesses were Carmen, the housekeeper, and Miguel, Raúl's business partner and best friend of 25 years. I wore a simple blue dress that Raúl said matched my eyes, and he wore a gray suit that made him look distinguished and handsome. No flash, no ostentation, no stress of impressing anyone. Just two people who had found each other again after 4 decades promising to spend whatever time they had left together. Diego came to the wedding. I debated whether I should even invite him, but Raúl convinced me to try one more time. "He's your son," he said simply. "He'll regret it if you don't give him the chance to do the right thing." So I called him 2 weeks before the ceremony. "Raúl and I are getting married," I said bluntly. "November 15th at 2:00. You're welcome to come, but Valentina isn't invited." He showed up alone, looking uncomfortable in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly shopping budget. He shook Raúl's hand, politely made appropriate small talk, and even managed a smile when the pastor pronounced us husband and wife. But I could see the calculation in his eyes, the way he took inventory of Raúl's house, his car, the obvious markers of wealth. This morning, I woke up in Raúl's arms, in my husband's arms, in the room that became ours, in the house that became our home. Sunlight streamed through the windows, overlooking the gardens we tend together, and I could smell the coffee Raúl makes every morning before I wake up. At 66, I am happier than I have ever been, not because of Raúl's money, or his beautiful house, or his success, but because someone sees me, really sees me, and chooses to love what they see. The fire took my old life, consumed it, and turned it to ash. But sometimes I think as I watch Raoul reading his morning paper across the breakfast table. Destruction is just another word for renewal. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to find everything you really needed. And sometimes, if you're really lucky, first love gets a second chance to become love forever. The business card I kept for 40 years is now framed sitting on Raoul's desk in his office. A reminder that some promises are worth keeping even when they take 4 decades to fulfill. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our videos. And if you want to support us even more, consider becoming a channel member. You'll have access to exclusive content and help our community grow. Thanks for watching this far.